Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess Channel and welcome back to the TCEC Season 22 Premier Division. So really well things happened at the end of this prestigious tournament. Stockfish got its revenge. Stockfish finished on the first place in the Premier Division. Really well stuff. As I said in the beginning of the super event, the Dragon Engine was in the lead through the whole event, and then in the end Stockfish gets again its first place and will meet now the Dragon Engine in their super final. And I'm really looking forward to cover the games because so far there were really great games between the Dragon Engine and the Stockfish Engine, and I expect still that the Stockfish Engine is slightly better than the Dragon Engine, because also in the direct games Stockfish won more games than Dragon. So as I said, it will be a beautiful super event for us to watch. We're following as usual the leader, which is now the Stockfish Engine, and I found really a beautiful game in which Stockfish destroyed this top engine Scorpion in really a beautiful positional way, applying the so-called bad bishop strategy. The bad bishop strategy is sort of a strategy in which you're maybe trying to get your opponent's one piece, especially in this scenario, your opponent's bishop. You want to get him as the really bad piece, because if your opponent has maybe some kind of a pawn structure with f6, g5, h6, and you see now if you have the small pawn chains all over the board, then of course your dark square bishop is not a good piece. It becomes more and more sort of like a big pawn, as we always like to say. When the bishop is bad, we call it sometimes the big pawn. So as I said, the bad bishop strategy sometimes you have to recognize in your own games, because playing against one particular piece, just only against one piece, can be really your whole strategy in the continuation of the game. So here I think Stockfish applied really a beautiful, really a monstrous bad bishop strategy against this top engine Scorpion. So let's check out now the game. It was, as I said, really beautiful chess game. So here d4 played by the fish, we have g6 by Scorpion, we have c4, bishop to g7, so the modern defense was on the board. And here after move knight to c3, d6 and e4, we have now the so-called cut-off variation of the modern defense. And it's similar like in the King's Indian. What black is hoping for is to get some kind of a clarification here with the move e5, hopes that white goes d5, then with knight to e7, and then with the move f5 to reach a similar structure like in the King's Indian. Then we want to push the pawns on the king side, and we want to create really some madness on this side of the board. But there are of course counterplay ideas for white. Notice that always in these types of ideas, white has always this space advantage in the center of the board. So even if e5 happens, still with d5 we can proceed and have a comfortable game in the center of the board. That's something that you should never forget. Still black has his chances of course with this attack, but I would love to always play more with the white pieces because of the space advantage, because of the flexibility that you have in the game, because of your piece activity that you have, because here you witness really a really beautiful bad bishop strategy. So after move knight to c6, here bishop to e3 was played by Stockfish. We have e5 and now knight to e2. This is very important to play the game like this. Knight to f3 would be, in my opinion, a strategical mistake, because after bishop to g4 we could have some kind of an opinion. I think here that the pressure is simply too much here exposed here in the center of the board around the square d4, although white is still slightly better when it comes to computer evaluations. But I think it's now much easier for black to play the game, especially because black has brought many pieces into the game, and in the near future we can also expect a normal move knight to f6. So as I said, here after move knight to e2 was played, because if you try now bishop to g4, it of course can be kicked away with the move f3. So here in the continuation we had knight to f6 and now finally d5, and we have reached now basically the common King's Indian structure. So after move knight to e7, we can notice now that okay, black will have his fun with the move f5, f4, maybe even g5, g4. So the only way to make some kind of a progress here for black is an expansion on the king side. But that's what I meant about the flexibility. White doesn't need to castle into black's attack. White still has opportunities maybe to play queen to d2 and queenside castling. So white has the flexibility to castle queenside, to castle kingside, but also in some occasions to even stay with the king in the center. So many times when you're playing the King's Indian with the white pieces, you have already castled on the king side, then I think it would be an unpleasant game if you face maybe f5, f4, then your opponent is storming with these pieces against your king. It will be, as I said, not a good position for white. But now in this scenario, as I said, Stockfish has still the flexibility to reach here castling on queen side and simply continue the pressure maybe with f3, g4, h4, and actually it would be white that would attack simply the king side. So as I said, notice always that white has simply the flexibility to castle on both sides, or even, as I said, to stay with the king in the center. So here f3, preventing also knight to g4. We have now knight to d7. So you see now the Scorpion engine is immediately trying to play the move f5, and now knight to c1. This move is very important, because if you don't play active here on the queen side too, then maybe black could play some kind of a blockade with b6, knight to c5, a5, a4. Black could cement the position on the queen side. That's very important to notice, because from white's perspective, what you want to do is push maybe some further pawns here on the queen side, because we have here some kind of an activity. The main goal would be sort of move to push the pawn on c5, but this has to be prepared. If your opponent plays the blockade on the queen side, then of course on the king side he could have some fun. So that's why you have to be careful. Knight to c1, perfect move here by the Stockfish engine, because if you try now knight to c5, this move can be met immediately with the move knight to d3, and then afterwards we can still kick away the knight with the move b4. So as I said, knight to c1, really a nice maneuver. So after move knight to c1, we have f5 immediately, knight to d3, and now b6. You see the Scorpion is still trying the same goal, to cement the position around the square c5. We have now g4, and this is now really a beautiful move, because okay, the point about this move g4 is not that white will continue the attack here on the king side. The point is simply that black doesn't want to doesn't have here an advantage on the king side. Still, white will probably castle here, but at least we want to open here somehow the position. We want to create maybe open files, open diagonals, because obviously black is trying now to secure the king by king side castling, or by playing the move king to f8. So that's why I really love the move g4, because it opens simply the position further on that side of the board. So we have now knight to f6, we have a rook to the g1, and now f4. And okay, it seems so that black is now getting some spaces here, but notice after move f4, we have now really the so-called bad bishop strategy here. The bishop is simply blocked out, it's paralyzed by its own pawn structure here. That's the beauty about this move f4. Basically white forced black to play the move f4, but now when that move happens, this bishop is useless here on g7. Meanwhile, of course, white has the bishop on f2. Maybe white bishop on f1 is not good, because it's also blocked out by its own pawn on c4, but I still think that we have sort of a mobility here to play b4, c5, and then the bishop can come into the game. So white pieces still have potential activities. On the other hand, we can really notice that black's piece here, the bishop on g7, is simply out of game. So here after move bishop to f2, we have now g5, we have now h4, and here g takes h4 is a must move here for black, because even if you try maybe something like h6, then you get h5 and you get further locked here. You get really cemented on the king side. Maybe you can secure the king by calcing, it's not a problem, but as I said, the game would be simply here a one-way ticket towards the queen side. And notice that here from black's perspective, you maneuvered all of your pieces towards the king side, and now suddenly you don't have any more pieces that could compete here on this side of the board. And white has here a perfect activity. And also because of the block pawn structure here in the center, I think that white can even stay with the king in the center. White doesn't have to even castle here. Maybe play something like bishop to e2, king to f1, king to g2. Nothing can happen, I think, dramatically. Maybe some tactical shots could work, so you could be careful here, but as I said, in my opinion, it would be risky here to try to open the position. In this position, white is much better. So after move h4, so that's why g takes h4. Black is trying to keep some kind of an activity. He's trying maybe to get somehow this bad bishop into the game. Here in the continuation, we have queen to b3, preparing queenside castling, and after h5, g takes h5, king to f8, and now bishop to h4. We have rook to h5, and now a beautiful positional trade of pieces here by the Stockfish engine. Bishop takes f6, because in this blocked pawn structures like this, you see we have really an immobile pawn structure here in the center of the board. The knights are perfect pieces, I think, because the knights will always find their route, sort of. The knights will always change directions, will always find at least one square that they can jump. But here after move bishop to f6, Stockfish got rid of a good knight that could be maybe a good piece. And now after bishop to f6, notice that this bishop's activity didn't improve. You can maybe try to play with the move bishop to h4, and you can also maybe get to g3, but not further, because this square is taken, and even if you manage maybe to cement your bishop here around the square g3, it's still a useless piece. So that's why here queenside castling played by Stockfish, not allowing an annoying check. We have a rook to h6, and now king to b1, bishop to d7, and now a4. As we said, now we have a beautiful activity. The pawn chain here is directed to this side of the board, and it's simply now time to push the pawns further. Notice also that here white has a beautiful attack on the g file. After bishop to e2, the rooks can be also connected. The rook connection is now very important, and this rook on h6 is a little bit loose, is a little bit out of game also in the continuation. So we have now a5, and now a rook to d2, preparing here doubling up rooks on the g file. So knight to g6, and now a beautiful again move by the Stockfish engine, c5. And this is really such a beautiful move, because there are of course only two things that you can do. You can play b takes c5. This was played, the Scorpion played in the continuation of the game. But if you try d takes e5, then it's really wild what Stockfish has prepared here. The game is over. If you play d takes c5, then you get even d6. The pawns are rolling, and now even if you try maybe c takes d6, then you could get this one. Knight to c5 would be, I think, a brilliant tactic. Even if you try d takes c5, then bishop to b5, you see we're continuing the pressure. You have to cover with the rook, then we include this other rook into the game. You have to cover again with this other rook, but now with rook to d6, this pawn is weak, this bishop is weak. You cannot attack the rook, your knight is hanging. You cannot also maneuver the queen here, because the bishop is taken here. Even if you try of course queen to c7 to get the queen out of the range, then of course the bishop is hanging. So these pieces are simply too overloaded. So this was maybe one line that could happen. So you see how the activity of white's pieces was simply much better. So of course this didn't happen, but I was really curious what's going to happen if d takes c5 would have been played by the Scorpion engine. So we have here b takes c5, but now it creates a new structural weakness. It creates now a weak pawn on a5, and notice if we maybe grab this pawn on a5, then we could have a passer on the a file, and it could be also a strategical problem here for black. So after move b takes c5, we have knight to c1, king to f7, and now queen to d1. We have queen to h8, and now bishop to b5. This is really again a new positional trades of pieces. Notice that we had already a beautiful positional trades of pieces. What I mean about positional trades of pieces is when you play when you trade maybe one bad piece of yours for your opponent's good piece. So now here when we took the knight on f6 was at least some kind of a flexible piece, caused now a bad bishop here on f6 for black. But now with the move bishop to b5, we have now a new strategical trades of pieces, because the only good again piece here of blacks is this light square bishop. It controls at least these two diagonals. So now with the move bishop to b5, Stockfish is getting rid of every good piece that black is in the continuation of the game. So it's now really a bad position for black. So after move bishop to b5, bishop takes b5, knight to b5, we have now rook to g8, competing of course on the g file. What you could do maybe is sort of a mistake here to play here rook takes h2, because rook to h2 would be simply too dynamic. You could then face this tactic, rook takes g6. If you take king to g6, then you get of course here queen to g1, then you lose the rook. So this is not working. You could maybe try it this way, rook takes d2, but then again rook takes f6 comes with check, king takes f6, and now after queen to d2, still it's a much better position. The pawn on c7 is weak, a5 is weak, also the e6 square is weak. So again with this flexible knight, white will find good ways to get them into the game. So here in the continuation, after move rook to g8, what you could instead of the move rook to g8, what you could do is maybe to play rook to c8 to protect your c7 pawn. This is also a weakness that we have to notice. But now with knight to b3, you see this pawn is hanging. We can compete again on the g file. So again a much better position here for white. So after move knight to b5, as we said here, the Scorpion engine played rook to g8, but now rook to g2, we have rook to h2, rook takes h2, queen takes h2, and now knight to b3, again with the same idea, just attacking this weakness on a5. Also the c7 is weak. So notice again, I'm pointing out the bishop is simply out of game. Through the whole game this bad bishop strategy worked. This bishop is, as I said, simply a big pawn sort of in the continuation. position, not a piece at all. So here after move knight to b3, we have knight to h4, rook takes g8, king takes g8, and now knight to a5. Of course, this is a pass pawn, and it's now completely winning game here for white. So queen to g2, knight to b3. You see Stockfish just pushed the pawn further. We have queen to e4, but now after queen to c2, you can maybe try. If you take, of course, then you cannot catch anymore this pawn. So that's why here queen to e1. We have king to a2, queen to b4, and now a beautiful check here by Stockfish. Queen to g6, king to f8, and now again just pushing the pawn further. You have only this move, queen to a4. We have bishop to d8, and here after move queen to c2, what we want to do is again just trade off the queens and then just to push the pawn further. So we have now queen to a6. This Scorpion engine is trying to stay, of course, on the a file, but now with queen to f5 and you check, you have to cover. We have now knight to d2, knight to c4 is now an opportunity. Notice that you can never really take the pawn on the knight on b5, because if that happens, white is simply pushing the pawn further. We have king to g7, and now knight to e4. We have queen to b5, and finally here we have a8, the promotion, and this is now completely winning. Okay, you can try maybe some checks like the Scorpion engine tried, but here after a couple of checks, no checks are possible. So here after the move f3, you can maybe try to promote a new queen, but it's simply too slow. Here Stockfish includes now the new queen into the game and has now a completely winning game here. At least we can create some checks. So okay, maybe these pieces are good, but still you don't have support to make your progress with the f pawn. So c4, we have queen to d7, bishop to e7, a new check, king to f8, and now again new check. You have to cover, and now after move queen to f5, you see the knight is a little bit locked here. We can also include here the knight into the game. Also the pawn is hanging, so perfect position here for white. So e4, we have queen to f4, building this battery on the f file. We have queen to g2, check now again, but knight to d1 causes new position problems here for black. Now white is solving every position problem because no checks are possible. That's the most important thing. And now also the knight is hanging. So that's why queen to g7, we take the pawn here, queen to g5, king to b1, here queen to g2, queen to e6. So the game is of course a little bit prolonged, but this is not working at all here for black. After move knight to g4, we have c takes b2, king takes b2, we have bishop to g5, knight to h6, we have bishop to h6, again queen to f6, threatening here some checks. We have queen to g2, king to b3. You can try maybe this check, but it's not working here. After queen to f7, it was a beautiful checkmate. So as I said, the really brilliant positional play by the Stockfish engine. Especially I like this trades of pieces. Let's go back here, bishop to f6 first. You see after move bishop to f6, okay, we gave up the bishop pair, but the bishop pair is not so important here in this types of blocked positions. So the pawn structure is simply too much blocked out that we've actually favors our knight, because we want to have good activities with the knight. Now in the continuation, what I also liked was to move c5 here. That was the breakthrough. After d takes c5, we had this maneuver, and now with bishop to b5, we got rid of the last piece basically that was good in black's position. From this point on, we saw the weakness on a5. There were some light square weaknesses in front of the king, so all of them were of course exploited by the top engine Stockfish. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Again, I'm pointing out the Stockfish engine won the Premier Division of the TCEC season 22. Really wild stuff. The whole tournament, the Dragon engine was in the lead, and Stockfish then played much better at the end of the tournament and finally took its first place, and will now face, as I said, the Dragon engine in their super final. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game like I did. Really interesting strategical stuff here by the Stockfish engine. If you want to see more brutal strategies and more brutal tactics played by top engines, check out my commented chess games played by computers, with some more games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, Dragon engine, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.